Hello, everyone. This is What Your Pastor Didn't Tell You. Today, I am on with my new friend Enoch. He has come to me with some new information about this whole Ammon Hillman saga, and we're going to be talking about some of the conversations that he and Ammon had together that exposed some really, really weird and odd things, but the people need to know about. So let's talk about those. Enoch, what brings you here today? What do you think is just so important for people to know about? Are you just, trying to disprove his text by insulting him? What are you coming here for?
I was a part of, I would really call it more of like a group of, honestly, I don't even know, like a group of scholarship, more like before it formed into a proper cult, if that makes any sense. And I started talking with him after I got in contact with him via Gnostic Informant. And one thing that kind of stuck out to me was, his personality. Now, I never had any issue with him, and I personally, I constantly question myself how I missed certain red flags. But even just looking at my first communications with him, in hindsight, there's some things that stick out like a sore thumb. Now, I also want to clarify, I actually really think that Ammon has some interesting ideas, especially regarding the role of entheogens in the ancient world, especially within the role of religion. But all his theories, and again, I'm not saying whether they are or not, but all his theories could be true, and it doesn't make what he's doing okay.
Just to give people an example, what are the big things that you want people to know after watching this?
Well, for one, is that he is in charge of a cult. Now, the thing is, our society tends to view cults as, inherently bad. They're not. The issue with his group isn't so much anything that they do, but the level of control and authority that he's exerted over people who look to him for spiritual advisement. And while he doesn't have a physical location where he's doing things with his group, and even if he did, I don't think that inherently would be the issue. What the issue is what he's teaching people about the way that one achieves gnosis, that one communes with the gods, that they're able to achieve aeonic life. Basically, he's telling people that if they want to improve themselves as people in the way that people in antiquity did, they need to follow the ways of, well, what he's teaching. And he explains it that, it's not his thing. He's just translating. But a lot of his translations, as people have suggested, are potentially faulty. Again, whether he's translating correctly or not, the issue is that he's teaching that these ways are a potential to achieving better states of existence.
Hmm. All right, Enoch, thank you. Can you go ahead and give us just a gist of what you're saying here in the first message here, and your general thoughts on why this is important?
Yeah, so this initial message, I sent it to him after first discovering him on Gnostic Informants, one of his live streams. I thought that Ammon was absolutely brilliant, and he was actually talking about a lot of things that were similar to some stuff I'd been researching basically during when COVID was in full swing. There were a lot of cult movements that were gaining traction, and because I had way too much time on my hands, I ended up researching one because I wanted to understand where they were getting their narratives from. And a lot of their narratives were very similar to stuff that, like I said, Ammon had been talking about. So when I was able to get his email from correspondence with him and Neil, Gnostic Informant, I was over the moon because I finally had two people that I really felt like I could have good intellectual conversations with. But yeah, so initially I'm just kind of introducing him to some of the stuff I've been looking into and asking him for any advice that he might have. And so, I mean, you can all read the messages if you really want, but I'm going to read his response. Nice to meet you. Please call me Ammon. It's my middle name and I prefer it. Now, just one thing to address. From what I understand in hindsight, and again, it's nitpicky. It's not really that significant, but in hindsight, maybe it is. So Ammon's name is it's David Charles Hillman. Now, if you look up his name, like how he has it, it's David Charles Ammon Hillman. But from what I understand, I'm not sure if that's the name he was given or if he adopted it later on because of his connection to the figure, and it'll come up later, as I mentioned. But so the first thing that he says to me, after saying nice to meet you, is that please call me Ammon, don't call me David. And it's perfectly respectable. I did that, no issue. You're monitoring a cult, fantastic. I want in. So initially, you can see he is somewhat interested in this idea. Bunch of racists, fantastic. Now you could just chalk this down to sarcasm, but who says fantastic at a bunch of racists? Who is on the minority menu? But bet they are revisionists of some sort. Please tell me they walk around like infected zombies, muttering words like Aryan and talking about conspiracies. I love fruitcakes who try to push their nationalism. Been watching that game for centuries. I don't know if I can help from a modern perspective, but I know a good number of long-dead cultists whose Greek and Latin works are full of stuff the Nazis always seem to want. Something that I really want to focus on here is he's not talking about narratives that will destroy us. He's talking about narratives that will feed this. And at first, I just ignored this because, if you meet someone, you like them, you don't want to, you'll see the best in them. And that's what I did for so long. You want weaponized narratives? Love it. Now, notice this. I didn't say weaponized narratives. I was trying to find narratives I could use to subvert, basically to take the steam out of these narratives. So he's saying you want weaponized narratives, in other words, ways to fuel those narratives. Love it. I've got enough of those to fuel dozens of indoctrinations. Personally, I think the early Christians and the Baptists before them had the best methods. Now, if you've been paying attention to his whole theories on the early Christians and the Baptists, he thinks that it's full of all these types of perversions that he, in some of his videos, criticizes them for and condemns them for. But here he's saying that he thinks that they're the best methods. So it's, and again, this is before he had a YouTube channel. This is before he had really any online presence. So this was before he started to kind of cut himself off from people who wanted to get in contact with him. Because I got his email basically within a day of meeting him. But yeah, so we should Zoom sometime. We can figure out if any of my info would be helpful. Amen. So then I respond to this, basically thanking him and just kind of explaining a bit more about, what I'm talking about. So let's see. I'm really intrigued by your research and its potential tie-ins to the specter of sex and drugs that haunts the church and has been exercised and projected onto the church's enemies. So I just kind of go on to explain to him a bit more about this conspiracy theory cult that I'd stumbled across. And I do think that this part's a bit important to read, so I'll just read it. The cult I'm monitoring is called Negative 48. I'll link some Twitter threads and videos that you can check out to really get a grasp on it, but here's my attempt at an explanation. Negative 48, also known as Michael Brian Protzman, is a delusional and extremely manipulative cult leader that I have proof of his connections to domestic influence networks that were responsible for January 6th and potentially QAnon itself. And this is, it's a whole thing, it's a whole rabbit hole, and it's not really relevant to this, but so I'll just keep going. How closely connected they are is the factor I can't account for due to my area of expertise being more human and narrative focused and less hard data analytics. Anyway, Michael is from the Pacific Northwest, particularly within an hour's distance of the Ramtha School of Enlightenment, where at one point there were plans to host an event panel on QAnon to indoctrinate their followers. It later got canceled. Michael is a gamatria-maniac. He exclusively teaches the French-English alphabet version A = 1, Z = 26, which you obviously know gives a smaller range of possible results despite being a larger alphabet. He he directs people to input everything they perceive as significant and even things that aren't into a website, which is a site run by someone who pushes the Zionist-occupied government theory, which is like far-right neo-Nazi crap. AKA Jews are in control of everything, AKA stuff spewed by one person who was on a stream that Neil and Ammon did together. Let's see, where is it? Who hopped on the Synagogue of Satan stream. It's specifically referring to one of the streams they did. It started off just being gematria, foreign exchange scams, silver and gold coin scams, and also this one product called LifeWave, which is essentially marketed as a MedBed patch. I have evidence. Anyway, the point is that this group, their cult leader had managed to sell the followers on a way to understand the world. And the thing is, this was before any of the, accusations of harmful influence or cult-like behavior emerged about Ammon. But a lot of the stuff that this one cult leader that I'm discussing with him about he did with numbers, Ammon is now doing with Greek. He by exercising his authority over the Greek language and this social authority that he's able to project for himself onto his followers. By using that, he can convince people that something means something that it doesn't mean, or that this one thing means something different just because he says it does, because he can connect it using a thin string. That thin string being the connection is enough for people. And he'll actually address this directly later on about how all it takes is the faith and the belief of those who are initiated, and then you've got someone hooked. So next one. So for this, we'll play a bit and discuss it, because this goes into basically the context of which I was talking to him about this, and further some of the techniques that I think he actually used, whether it was picking up from this or whether it was just a coincidence, I really don't know.
On that Tuesday morning in Dallas's Dealey Plaza, this is a sample of what we heard. And
I know a lot of why I'm here was ordained by the Lord.
What we saw.
I should think that the police would come and block off the street or something too,
Who's your president?
I'm here to support God-fearing patriots in the movement.
A movement that on that morning.
You need music or something.
What are you expecting?
What am I expecting?
Well, we'll let them tell you.
There was an event that was said to possibly happen here today.
Word on the street is that JFK Jr., will show up and introduce his parents.
12:29, the same time of day that JFK Sr. was shot here in this spot.
Probably the majority of us know that JFK Jr. is alive.
You're expecting JFK Jr.?
Absolutely.
Okay, how's that going to happen?
He never died.
Are we going to see him today?
JFK Jr.?
Yeah, that's what everyone's telling me.
We're hoping. You hope and pray.
And then after that?
He'll probably be the vice president with Trump. I hope I'm right. I believe I'm right. And I believe today
One thing I want to point out there.
Well, it wasn't biblical.
This is common with a lot of cults or with religious groups. One thing I do want to also clarify. Not all cults are harmful religious movements, but many are. And the way that our society refers to harmful religious movements typically is by just calling them cults. But one thing that is typical with them is that people, like contemporary politics, is made into something that's larger than life. It's injected into religion. And so with this particular group, they actually believe that, that John F. Kennedy Sr. was the second coming of Christ, that John F. Kennedy Jr. was the Archangel Michael, and that Donald J. Trump was the physical incarnation of the Holy Spirit. Now, yeah, it sounds delusional, but the thing is, like you'll see him say, faith and belief for the initiated is all that you need in order to have something be true. And with this particular group, they treat Trump as if he's holier than thou. They say that he's connected to this Jesus bloodline. But the thing is, as has come up within his own cultic narrative, Ammon has actually suggested that Trump is this Talos figure, that he's a cyclops, that he's going to usher in the apocalypse. And so it's one of these things where, like, yeah, I mean, there's plenty of people who don't like Trump, and plenty of people who say, yeah, he's going to usher in the apocalypse, but they don't mean it in this literal way that, you know, people, like, there's a difference between saying someone's going to bring about destruction and someone's going to bring about a prophecy. And in this case, he is implying that it is prophetic.
Gotcha.
In 1999 did not show up.
Biblical.
That's fascinating.
Fascinating to a professor who studies this stuff.
But Donald Trump always holds his cards to the last minute.
This is really common in apocalyptic religions, that the end never quite happens, but it's always around the corner.
We are Q.
Dr. Michael Phillips is an author and a professor of American history at Collin College.
1229. What would be the mirror of 1229?
And in this peaceful gathering where JFK Jr. did not make an appearance, he sees more than just political theater. He sees potential trouble.
It's a merger of far right-wing politics with apocalyptic religious beliefs.
Strong religious component.
Dr. Kimmy King is an attorney and professor of political science at UNT Denton.
Some people will call it cult. Some people will call it a family. What matters is that there's a belief structure there that you share in common. It's when that belief structure gets challenged that it becomes problematic.
The Southern Poverty Law Center considers QAnon a sprawling spiderweb of right-wing internet conspiracy theories with anti-Semitic and anti-LGBTQ elements that falsely claim the world is run by a secret cabal of pedophiles who worship Satan and are plotting against President.
Okay, so this is the reason why I saw a congruence with what Ammon was talking about. And I was wondering, okay, is there a kernel of truth to these beliefs that QAnon have, like, all the way back in antiquity? Maybe this is where all these ideas are coming from, and people are twisting them and weaponizing them in order to go after, you know, gay people and Jews and liberals today. That was my thought. And so I asked him, and he basically goes on to confirm everything that now, the question is, how much of this is actually true? I was not as critical as I maybe should have been at that time, both of the way he was responding as well as what he was responding with. But let's continue a bit more, and it'll become more clear.
They're plotting against President Trump. In 2019, the FBI warned of conspiracy theory-driven domestic extremists as a growing threat, with QAnon on that FBI list. And QAnon converts were a visible part of the attack on the Capitol on January 6th, and among the hundreds arrested so far.
I think the ability of the internet to mobilize people that believe in a violent apocalypse, that's disturbing.
You start connecting dots and you're like, are you kidding me right now?
The distance between QAnon and a mainstream political party is not as distant as I would hope.
Oh, wow, it's coming in pretty clear.
On that Tuesday morning,
Well, that means something.
where conspiracy theories were the order of the day,
Elvis is still alive.
The Elvis.
The Elvis is still alive. And this is where I lose you.
Are you pulling my leg? You
Nope.
believe all this stuff? You really do?
Listen, first of all, I believe in God. I'm not some wacko person. I believe in this 100%.
there was one real truth several of these people agreed to talk about.
But you got to understand that most of the world is going to think that's just crazy.
That's why half my family won't talk to me anymore.
They won't.
And my girlfriend thinks I've lost my mind.
That is actually very common phenomena too.
Entire online communities like this one on Reddit are dedicated to that. Families that
This
conspiracy
is
theories like
another
these
thing
have
that
torn
I
apart.
think hasn't really been discussed enough, but it's also not as significant as it is in QAnon. But there are a lot of people well, I'm not going to say a lot, but there are some people who, because of their following of Ammon and basically, reading and listening to everything he's saying, it changes their personality enough that some of them have had like rifts with their families. And of course, like sometimes you could say, oh, well, maybe it's just because this person's from an evangelical family. And so, of course, if they, believe what Ammon's saying, but see, this is one of the things. If you can get someone to believe something that, okay, first of all, I guess it's difficult because whether it's true or not is besides the point in this case. The claim that Ammon makes that Jesus was a pederast, of course, like it does matter whether it's true or not. But in the case of if he can get someone to believe that, regardless of whether that fact is true or not, then anyone in their life who loves Jesus there's going to be that rift that's thrown between them. It's actually fairly similar to the way that like basically this inversion technique. A lot of people in QAnon ended up losing contact or like breaking off contacts with their families because they themselves view Trump as some sort of superhero that's going to rid all the corruption from the world, while a lot of people, on the other hand, see Trump as being a symptom of that corruption. And without getting into the politics, the point is that if you can convince someone to believe that something that is essentially completely opposite of the way that their social environment does believe, you're able to basically get that much more influence over them, because it's not simply that they're listening to you, but by listening to you and spreading that, they're distancing themselves from others. And it's a far field from this to QAnon, but it's essentially two opposites of the same coin, two sides of the same coin, where in one hand it's about trying to call out pedophilia. In the other case, it's trying to expose pedophilia. But the problem is that in either case, it's being used to draw people away from their families, and in order to bond them to each other, like the people who share these experiences of being outcast or of feeling like they found the truth and needing to spread it, and then that act of spreading it then causing them to become that much more alienated.
Marriages have been destroyed. People have lost jobs, their livelihoods, because of something they believe in.
And these are people who feel powerless and alone.
There is this need to feel like you belong and that on some level you are right.
The Q community itself gives them a new sense of family.
Michael, how are you?
Family led that morning
Beyond excellent, by the way.
by a man who calls himself
Negative 48 was here, which I don't know where he's at.
Negative 48.
And what does that mean?
48's evil. EVIL. E is 5, V is 22, I is 9, L is 12. 48. Negative evil. Negative 48.
Belief in a secret language of numbers.
Well, there's a gathering here today.
Part of this mindset, too.
Donald Trump always holds his cards to the last minute. The last minute.
Okay. Are we at the last minute yet?
No. It's the middle of the day.
Which reminded Dr. Phillips of this ad in a Dallas newspaper that morning in 1963 that listed grievances against JFK and his photos as mugshots.
He hadn't gotten to Dallas yet. He was looking at the Dallas newspaper with that ad. He said, we're going into nut country. When a city gets a reputation like that, it becomes a magnet.
It was so nice to meet you.
Thank you. Do you have my card?
A magnet whose center that morning was Dealey Plaza.
You can save this footage and review it later, and you'll be going, wow, she was right about everything.
I don't know what's wrong with those people. That's what they're going to say.
And you know what I say to them? What's wrong with you?
What a great place to meet someone like-minded.
Like-mindedness you can pass off as unusual.
Well, you realize you're dealing with famous people here, so they usually run late.
Or like the experts.
I'm here to see and listen and obey
Watch with a very real measure of concern.
and spread love.
Truth is boring. Fiction is way more interesting sometimes.
In Dallas,
God bless America.
Why would anybody make all this up?
I'm Kevin Reese.
Sweet You know, it is hard to say how many people believe in QAnon, but it's not a small number. Before Facebook blocked QAnon content, some groups had hundreds of thousands of members. And right after the insurrection on January 6th, Twitter removed more than 70,000
I really just
accounts
want to
affiliated
emphasize
with QAnon.
how different but how similar these two movements are. Particularly how they're organized along the poles of their views of pederasty. One viewing it, and again, I want to state this clearly: pederasty is disgusting. All forms of it. Like, the thing is, children can't consent. But and so what these two movements, one is so focused on it that they're essentially turning people who aren't pedophiles into that, because they need it, their imagination, they need it to be the case for their story to be true. And on the other side, with Ammon's group, well, actually, they're also turning people who weren't pederasts into pederasts for narrative purposes, as well as actually, and this is what I think is particularly concerning, that, people talk about, but people try to say, oh, that's not what they're talking about, oh, that's not what he means. But that in Ammon's case, he actually does think that, well, I'm not going to jump ahead of myself. We can get on to the next slide. All right, so a lot of this is just kind of explaining what that one quote was. But I do want to just focus on a few things here. So the cult's primary ideology is holy bloodline versus serpent seed. So that's one of the things I was asking him for advice on, because they were basically using this as a way of painting certain war heroes who are really war criminals, but like Mussolini, Hitler, mainly fascists, trying to paint them as descendants of Jesus or something, then teaching that there's this evil Jewish cabal, which I do want to emphasize something. Ammon has never, implied that type of stuff. So, at least there's that. But, so I was asking for his advice because, and then there was also this notion of the holy bloodline, that there's certain populations that were, extra pure, that were, descendant of Jesus, that they were teaching was, I think the Druze, the Druze, the Basque, the Armenians. Honestly, I don't know where they were getting these narratives from. I think in hindsight, some of them might have been coming from Russian agitprop. But what I want to focus on here, though, is this idea of they're literally taking the Nazi Aryan race theory, swapping Aryan for Atlantean, Jew for Khazarian, the Middle East for America. So one thing that, and again, there's so many things that someone could do that it's I don't think that he was looking at this as a guide, especially because he's been around long enough that, I wouldn't give him any new ideas, is my point. But this idea of taking the master race type of idea and just changing the group to make it socially acceptable. And so in Ammon's case, he's done that with the Pulaskians. The Pulaskians are the real people who brought culture to the Greeks. It wasn't the Semites, because the Semites were just he had. And to be fair, he also calls the Romans mud hut dwellers. So it's not like he's being discriminatory solely to Semites or Semitic speaking peoples, but he very much wants to take away from the Eastern influence on Greek and focuses almost solely on the northwestern influence, or no, it'd be just northern influence from the Black Sea region with the Pulaskians and the Georgians. And he's basically implied that that's what the Aryans are, and Ammon himself has delved into into Aryan race type stuff, except rather than saying Aryans, although he basically says that that's what they are, he just switches it out for Pulaskian or for it's been rough. Honestly, I haven't listened to a lot of his stuff in a while, just because I value my sanity. But one thing, sorry. So let's see. I'm looking through this. Yeah. Well, let's move on to the next page. And then, yeah, a lot of this stuff is inconsequential, but you can always read it. There was one thing to note, that they did end up getting, somehow getting involved with Roseanne Barr and Roger Stone. Like, the point is, these aren't nobodies. They managed to make connections with relatively famous people and use that as ways of spreading their ideology. Now, Ammon has done the same thing with Danny Jones, and also with Gnostic Informant. He's used people as ways of spreading his influence, and after he's done with it, after he gets something out of them, he doesn't always treat them the best. And there's multiple people who can attest to this. But let's see. Moving on. There also, one thing to mention before is that this other cult, to draw the parallels, there's certain things that they would get their followers to do that were honestly kind of embarrassing. The type of thing that shows that someone was really invested, because they were just so part of the group that it didn't even faze them. And that you've got some elements of that with Ammon as well, but I don't really think it's as important to focus on. So I'm going to read his response to, basically informing him about this cult. Okay, I've been mulling over your email, trying to figure out how I could be of any help in your inquiry into the sex and drugs connection to Christianity, and any projections onto other groups by cults or conspiracy leaders. I followed your links, your link leads on -49 and the movement of the folks in Dallas. I'd like to say off the start that I envy your position. I'm not sure if you are an anthropologist, psychologist, historian, lawyer, prognosticator, or legal investigator, but you may have to be a little of each to figure things out. I'll give you what I have to offer on such interesting work. Let me know if anything is useful. Holy bloodline versus serpent seed theology. There are multiple ancient sources in Greek and Latin that can be used to bolster both of these conspiracy-promoting expressions. Now notice this. I asked him for help in figuring out how to deflate these ideas. He's looking for ways to bolster them. And that's something that he has certainly done in the months and years since these correspondences. Like, to a point that it actually is disturbing. Because, and one person could say, oh, well, maybe he's not intending to do it. The fact that he's expressly saying he has ways of bolstering them means be unintentional. I'm sorry. There's no way that you say this on one hand and are ignorant to it when you're doing it on the other. To continue what he said, give me 30 minutes at a convention of true believers and I can show them Greek that will prove both theories, especially QAnon. I really enjoy the discomfort of rational academics who don't have enough of a grasp on the texts and the fingerprints left in the classical languages to enable them to distinguish between authentic context and conspiratorial fabrications. This, and this is just my commentary, but something about that just comes across as really, really twisted. But I'm going to move on. It's all about the underlying and this is what I was referencing before. It's all about the underlying logic of the cult belief and an ability to use authority recognized by those who are initiated or profess faith. He's literally laying out almost a step-by-step plan of how he himself later ended up forming, this cult. And again, I want to specify, I don't think all cults are bad. I think what's concerning is that he's teaching his cult, and you could argue, okay, it's beyond his cult. Like, he's teaching anyone who will listen, anyone who watches videos, that, the true mystery involves pederasty. And something that'll come up later, I bring up the issue. I noticed even from the beginning there was some issues with what he was saying, with that, like, if that's true about, these religions, well, then there's all these ethical issues, but we'll get to that in a moment. So he continues, when followers come to reasonable conclusions on their own, the machine comes alive. As we have seen with the insurrection and the rise of anti-Semitic, anti-homosexual, white nationalism among Nazi-embracing authoritarian romantics, looking for justification to expel, oppress, and destroy their enemies. How can I help? I can point you to the patterns that show up in the thoughts and actions of the conspirators. From these patterns, we should be able to both predict the future of the conspiracies as well as any antidotes that have been used to neutralize them. Now notice this, he doesn't say as well as any antidotes that can be used to neutralize them. He's saying that have been used to neutralize them. So like, it doesn't, and again, I might be nitpicking this a bit much, but it doesn't actually seem like he's trying to find ways to neutralize them so much as find ways that they have been neutralized. But the fact that genocide, that's in the next one, so can we move on to the next?
He says, give me, this many minutes at a convention of true believers, and I can show them Greek that will, quote unquote, prove both theories. So is he saying that he can prove that they're right, or is he saying that he knows what to do to convince any
the two theories are holy bloodline, which is this idea that there's a holy bloodline of Christ that's like been passed down through history, basically Da Vinci Code type stuff. And basically kind of the implication is that like you're going out of the next coming of Christ from someone in that lineage, and so it's super important to protect it. And then the serpent seed theology is this idea that Jews are the spawn of Satan and are, like essentially reptilians, and that, but more than that, that they're trying to kill off this holy bloodline. Like basically, it's like Star Wars, but with a Bible. And so he's saying, give me 30 minutes at a convention of true believers, and I can show them Greek that will prove both the holy bloodline theory. And I was telling him about, like, they believe that, that these different fascists are part of the holy bloodline of Christ, and then they believe that Jews are the spawn of Satan. He's saying, give me 30 minutes with believers, and I can prove both of those theories to them. So yeah, he's basically talking about converting conspiracy theorists' biases.
So what I'm really getting at is, does he actually think that they're true,
I don't know
or is he just saying that he could convince them?
There were enough times that he brought up things that kind of made me question, well, why would someone say that in the first place? But on the other hand, does it actually matter whether or not he believes that if he's willing to try and convince, trying to manipulate people? Like, I think the fact that he's aware that something could not be true, but that he knows that he could still convince someone of it, especially with Greek, because I don't think he's an idiot when it comes to Greek. I think he's very knowledgeable when it comes to Greek. And I think he knows enough to know how to manipulate people into thinking things that aren't true, or things that are technically true but semantically aren't. It would be something like, oh, I just planted a seed. And then he goes and says, well, I understand English. That person said I just inseminated someone. That's not what was said. But with enough knowledge of something and enough confidence, you could trick people who didn't have that as a native native language, to believe that to plant a seed always means to, inseminate. And so context is really important. And the fact is that he's studied Greek enough to know what he's talking about, but also long enough to know how to make people think things are true, even though they're not.
I guess maybe put another way is, it's concerning that he is even considering convincing someone of something that's clearly wrong, or maybe not clearly wrong, but maybe even dangerous or immoral.
Basically, if I told you there's a way that you could become a superhero, you could live it, like, what your life is right now, it's like 1% of what it could be. You want to be at 10% or 100%. all you have to do is this one thing. But the thing is, if that thing is wrong, if it's immoral, if it's illegal, if it's unethical, but you're telling someone that this is the way to solve some of the, like for instance, and this is something that we'll see later. Say someone's suffering from an illness. You don't know what people are going through when they're watching your content. Say someone's suffering from a terminal stage of cancer. Maybe they're not particularly balanced as well. And they listen to his content and they want a cure for cancer. This is, was it abductio ad absurdum. This is the most extreme case. But you could, because of what he's saying, could give someone the idea to do something. And again, the thing is, there's people who are going to do things no matter what, and that just needs to be addressed. But if you're telling someone that you can extract a material or spiritual benefit from doing something that they wouldn't normally do, there's certain circumstances that someone would do that because of how desperate they are. And I think that's one of the reasons why when you're speaking with authority, you have a certain level of responsibility to know that the way that you are educating or that you're spreading information, that information has wings, and it's not going, the moment that you speak it, it doesn't disappear, and it has influence on people. But I think it's more apparent in some of the later communications. The fact that genocide is the ultimate anticipated outcome is telling. This exposes the underlying plan that directs the movements of the cult leadership and explains its actions over time. Now, I did tell them that ultimately they kind of view Jews, or not specifically Jews, but they view the Cabal, which for this conspiracy theory group was interchangeable with the Jews more or less. So I'm not saying this isn't Ammon saying this is the plan, but some of it does appear to be a bit of projection. It just, honestly, I don't know where it's coming from. It's eerie is what I'll say, and explains its actions over time. As you well know, your brand of lunatics actively employs a plan that is anchored in the formation of Christianity from its inception. This plan will manifest itself naturally and with miraculous predictability. You could say it's all prophetic, and they do. The result, stone, anti-Semites, and satanic portals over the White House. Your guy, -49. Also, something that, and again, being nitpicky, but I told him it's -48. This is the second time he said -49. Later on, he says -69. He's being funny. He's simultaneously not being serious at all, but there's a certain level of just grimness that's for someone to joke. I don't know what's more disturbing, for someone to be serious about this or to be joking about it. But your guy, -49, is using a predictable algorithm that has been operating for longer than 2,000 years. So we should be able to accurately predict his moves before he makes them, and to devise a means of countering them. The plan is Armageddon. So now I don't know if he's saying this is his plan or if he was just again saying that their plan. But the plan, and also because of some of the stuff he said in the past few months, I do think that this could actually allude to what he was talking about. But again, just the way that he describes this, this is, I mean, the truth is it's anti-Semitic, what he says, though, his excuse would probably be oh, well, I'm just joking, or I'm talking about what they'll do. But it's I don't think someone could read this and not feel a bit off-put by it. Self-enriching Armageddon, in which the streets run with the blood of folks like you who wear a skull cap and worship demons like your ancestors did when they first stood against the dictates of the priesthood and its initiates. They are justified and will prove it by exposing you. Exposure is what they do. Call it Inquisition if you want, or call it Revelation. It's a final solution to the problem of making visible the invisible connections of the Jews' gays' lives with that which impedes apocalypse. This, I really don't have words for that. That's just it. I'm going to move on because I don't have words. Numerology, not my bag. I'm trained in classical cults and Pythagorean sacred mathematics. is the extent of my domain. I don't do Kabbalah, despite its profound impact on neoclassical thinkers in the Renaissance and beyond. Why? Now, this is crucial. Why? Because I'm a classical philologist, not a Semitic languages guy, and don't talk smack in an area where I can't use the primary sources. This is so verifiably false. He is a classical philologist, but he does try and talk smack in areas where he doesn't and can't use the primary sources. And I think this is honestly the fact that I noticed this and started to raise questions through the knowledge of this. That is actually that's more or less why they removed me from their study group or whatever you call it. I was in it before it was properly like a cult, I'd say. And although there were some certain rituals that because I didn't realize that he was actually just, and again, I don't think that there's anything wrong with Satanism inherently, but his brand of Satanism, I see at the end of the day, I think it matters less who you worship or what you worship. It matters more so what you believe that worship entails. And if being a good person, doing good deeds, and respecting others is a part of that worship, then I think that that's great. But that's not what he's teaching. So to continue. Having said that, I'd be happy to show up at a QAnon Baptist Nazi tent revival and preach the sources. I can promise you converts and spirit-filled enthusiasm that will rival the meetings in antiquity and the Middle Ages that resulted in the execution of Jews, witches, and intellectuals alike. How? I can show them the plan. I can show them the central hope and glory of the way. Now, this is real cult language. The fact that way is capitalized, the central hope and the glory of the way, this is really loaded language, but especially way being capitalized. And that happens to be the extermination of baby blood drinking Satanists like yourself. So, this is, now here he's not saying what they believe are baby blood drinking Satanists like yourself. He's saying this, and given he's a Satanist, Jews don't drink blood. There's literally a prohibition against drinking blood in Judaism. But and see, this is the type of thing where, if he said it publicly, I'd be like, oh, without a doubt, this is anti-Semitic. But he was being friendly, but saying stuff like this where it was off-putting, I didn't really know how to respond. And so you'll see how I responded. It's it clearly shows I was I didn't know how to respond quite. But
Before you keep going, so you keep saying the word anti-Semitic, so some people might not be familiar with that. So what specifically could you just, I know it's obvious to you, but for people not familiar with it, can you just explain clearly what he is saying that I guess is morally bad, or just are you saying another way of that's racist against Jews, or
I think
what is
the
Ammon saying
most
here
central thing is that
really worrying?
He's basically expressing that he'd be willing to collaborate or to work with people. So there's multiple levels to this. I think the first is that he's talking to someone who he knows is ethnically Jewish, and he's making all of these loaded comments about Jews drinking baby blood and worshiping demons. And, again, at first I didn't think he was really serious, but again, I just want to raise a question. Who says something like this? But beyond that, in multiple places, he's talked about, give me 30 minutes, let me talk to them. How can I help? And the thing is, he wasn't actively trying to really, this was when he was still being hosted on Gnostic Informants channel, and honestly, it was pretty interesting because he wasn't in control of everything. But since he's had a channel, if you follow the progression of his channel, it gets darker and darker and more disconcerted and babbling, and Like, I don't know what's going on with him. I'm not going to pretend like I do. But even in these emails all the way back in 2022, before Lady Babylon even existed, you can definitely see some things that indicate he was willing to build up a following. He was willing to talk to people, but like not just to educate them, but like actually this idea of indoctrination.
Hmm. Yeah. There was one picture that maybe we can briefly mention here, which is so it's just an email sent to a number of people, but basically he says, blows my link to my live stream this Friday evening. Turns out YouTube is the new temple. It will be a live chat, mass satanic initiation. We will look at drugs and Lady Babylon. So basically, like, even before the whole YouTube scene, he's got this group, as you were saying back in 2022, that has some odd things going on
Yeah,
there.
so I never
Did you have
actually
any thoughts to
got
add
that
on this
email, so
specific
I
thing?
can't speak that much to it, but I do just want to point out a few things. So, my fallen companions referencing the whole satanic motif, but that's not that significant. Below is a link to my live stream this Friday evening. And it's also worth noting he started his streams on Friday because the whole thing like, oh, it's going to be our, witches Sabbath or, our Black Sabbath or whatever. Turns out YouTube is the new temple, basically referring to the fact that that he wanted to use YouTube for initiation for ritual. It'll be a live chat. Mass satanic initiation. We'll look at drugs and Lady Babylon with a never before translated Greek cold text. Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's anything too. Oh, also this. I'll be alone for 30 and then be happy to include you should you. So yeah, I don't know who this is referring to, but I don't. The main thing to focus on is this, like, satanic initiation. Like, again, it's the type of thing where I don't think there's anything wrong inherently with satanic initiation. I think the issue is when your satanic initiation is part of a way of indoctrinating you into believing that there's something sacred about pederasty. So, to continue, does that help? I'm not sure, but if we can propagate the wave, we can also dissipate it. The Romans tried to stop it and failed. It cost them everything. Ask Celsus and Julian. As -69 or whatever number or letter he assumes would tell you, it's all math. So the question, what's the next move? You and I should be able to predict their future with perfect, immaculate accuracy if we know their pattern, and if we know the pattern and have the plan. Amen. Addendum. We should be able to predict the future. If -69/QAnon follows the pattern, he/they will identify Judaism with a bi-gendered baby blood-drinking Satan. I look for it. That's how the plan advances and hidden prophecy becomes genocidal lunatic reality. Amen. So I respond to. So also I want to just point out. So he sent this August 4th. I responded August 13th. Now, given I was busy, I have a life. I'm also really bad at checking emails, but so I responded, Ammon. Sorry it took so long to respond. I have to admit that a lot of sarcasm and dry humor gets lost on me when simply reading text. So when I first read your offer to, quote, show them the plan, I can show them the central hope and glory of the way, and that happens to be the extermination of baby blood drinking Satanists like yourself, end quote. I was kind of thrown for a loop because I knew you couldn't be serious, but at the same time, I couldn't quite understand how you meant it. And I was trying to be generous because, like, I was a bit starstruck. Like, I'd kind of impressed him. I was talking with him, and I didn't want to, like, piss him off. And he hadn't been rude. He hadn't been rude or anything. So besides, like, really weird about this, and like, I've also been around enough anti-Semites where it's like, I know I'm not just like, I'd rather know what the worst that someone has to say to me so that I can know what they actually think. And in this case, like, I didn't think he was going to be like, oh yeah, I actually believe this, or oh yeah, I think Jews are evil. I don't think that's what he was going to say, but anyway, to move on. I've also been working on starting up a club at my university, and I've been having to jump through bureaucratic. It's not really that important. But so I was responding. How can you help? I'm primarily trying to get a grasp on the historical context in which some of their ideas emerge from. Many of the texts that they rely on are propagandized forms of Greek Christian and pagan texts. They also use a lot of Gnostic imagery to pull in their followers, but I can only really distinguish what is Theosophical Society influence from what is ancient Greek and Egyptian. I found a heavy reliance on Theosophical Society reinterpretation of those older texts, and think better understanding them could help track where they're going before they do. Next one. To go there in order to try and inoculate or prepare for that incoming waves. As for numerology, I see a lot of what seems to be Neo-Pythagorean influence on this cult, even to the extent of their dietary practices. They don't abstain from lima beans, but their justifications and rationalizations remind me so much of the cult of Pythagoras. The belief in existential qualities and meta-reality of numbers is a shared quality in both Pythagorean and Renaissance Kabbalistic thought, and I don't see any resemblance beyond the form between Gematria and what they are doing. And also, for context, I think I told you before, but Gematria is basically Hebrew numerology. There's also only a small amount of the research I'm doing. I view this as more of a public service than my career, and also a way of keeping tabs on one of the most fringe movements to impact American society through Overton window shifting. Many of their ideas are already breaching or have breached the fringes of the left to the extent I find many of my friends and acquaintances to be vulnerable to being sucked into the pipeline. I was hoping to speak with you and brainstorm ideas or discuss areas of interest sometime. Talking with you on that live stream was beyond invigorating, but I think a one-on-one conversation could yield some additional thoughts that aren't possible when trying to stay on task. Lastly, to address your ended question, they already have seeded a mirrored double narrative, where God the Father is actually a mother-father God. I think he's referencing Barbello, whereas he's talking about the Jews /Khazarians /Kabbalists /globalists /dogless souls galore worshipping a transgender God. So they reference Eliphas Levi's Baphomet. But they reference Eliphas Levi's Baphomet. So really they are referring to bigender /hermaphrodism. They've essentially created a narrative that justified anything for them, but demonizes their enemies for doing these same exact things. Now that sort of like mirrored narrative where, it's a rules for me, not for thee. Ammon does that when it comes to pederasty. He says when Jesus did it, it wasn't okay because he was trying to profit from it. But when Jason and Medea and all these Greek figures, when they did it, and Hercules, when they were involved in it, it was okay because they weren't profiting off of it. To continue, they've essentially created a narrative that justifies anything for them but demonizes their enemies for doing the same exact things. Kabbalah, quote unquote, Kabbalah's demonic Babylonian demon worship, but also, quote, the Vedic traditions are the real uncorrupted Kabbalah, and not only is it okay, it's good. So those two ideas can exist in the minds of these people. They can justify token trans, gay, Jewish, and Muslims as members of their coalition so long as they fall in line with the fascist agenda and betray their own communities. But the moment those people happen to be liberals or Democrats, or the trans person the moment those people happen to be liberals or Democrats, the trans person becomes treated like a groomer, the Jew becomes just another Christ killer, and the gay guy stops being respected and viewed as a hypersexual deviant by the political communities they were once welcomed in. So and that's another thing similar but different that you have with Ammon, where it doesn't matter what background you come from, it doesn't matter what you believe, so long as you accept this and don't go against it. And that's one of the things that happened with me. This type of esoteric fascism is ultimately about creating a system of rules for thee, but not for me. Except the system doesn't rely on the selective enforcement or policies of policies by empowered authorities and enforcers. Rather, it turns the masses and crowds into the enforcers themselves. If you can convince your subjects that you are a god and have a divine right to rule, all of a sudden all your actions, however horrendous or marvelous, get viewed with a type of shock and awe. I think shock and awe. It explains why so many of Trump's followers, however radical, all have a level of devotion to him that they cannot explain. They will use mundane explanations, and though they can be easily dismantled, it's like his followers live in an alternate reality where their minds exist while their bodies are taken over by a possessing spirit. I truly wonder whether or not this type of psychosocial phenomenon might not be the very spirits and demons that people knew about in ancient times, especially in a time where symbols and images were much more mysterious and confined to those who knew. Anyway, I'm starting to ramble, though if you have any sort of messaging platform that might be easier to correspond, though I think that correspond through, I think Google might have one, but I've never used it. Best wishes and hope to speak shortly. So yeah, that was a long response for me, but it kind of just shows you like where I'm coming from. Also, I mean, I'm sure there are some people who probably disagree with me about the whole Trump thing, and that's fine. That's not the focus of this. It's more so and I also want to specify, I don't think that's all people who voted for Trump. I'm talking about the people who treat him like a god emperor. So I do want to, draw that distinction. But basically this idea that if someone is some sort of vessel or channel of divine power, or if you can believe that, then you can justify anything they'll do or say for the most part.
Yeah, it's really fascinating how you're reading these things and you're actually saying them to Ammon, and then, a couple of years later, it's like, oh shoot.
Yeah, and so when I
Ammon's
saw
literally
that, I actually
doing a lot
forgot
of
this
these same things
correspondence
here.
even existed. I ended up discovering it one day when I was looking through my emails, and I was like, I got a pit in my stomach because this was after Ammon had already started, his whole, and I also want to specify, like, I'm not talking about Lady Babylon as this channel. I'm talking more so about, like, his kind of inner group, like the community that exists beyond just the people who watch the streams. Though a lot of them are part of, I'd say probably all of them watch his streams because, I mean, that's intuitive. But it's not as simple as to just say, like, oh, because someone watches his stream that they are or not. But that, like, the people who engage with it, like, beyond just listening to him, but actually talking amongst each other. And I don't think they're bad people. I really want to state that. I think that most people are good or ignorant to what's going on. And like the truth is that I didn't have an issue with anything that Ammon was saying until I started to realize that like he really wasn't drawing a certain line that needed to be drawn. And it's like it's the type of thing where like there's let's just say there's a reason why there's laws about buckling your seatbelt. It's not because people plan on crashing their cars, but like when you're talking about certain things that have an inherent risk to them, whether it's like a info hazard, like now that someone knows this, they might do it, or it might impact the way they view the world, or whether it's whether it's simply like giving someone knowledge that it's like whether it's instructions how to build something that could cause a lot of damage, or whether it's simply just knowing something that then changes the way you interact with the world. Sorry, I don't know exactly where I was going with that, but just to reiterate, I think that most people who are involved with them, I don't think they're bad. I think they just want to learn more about the ancient world just like I did, and I think that they enjoy listening to very charismatic and, honestly, at times at times funny, academic. He has a PhD, but the thing is that all of his qualifications don't take away from the issues with what he's saying. So, to continue, so he's responding to what I said. He says, I finally got time to respond. Classes have been crazy busy. I'm way overbooked online now. Yes, my subtlety gets me labeled a demoniac. Glad you get it. That's his response to, or that's what I imagine is his response to my comment about talking about the blood, the streets running red with the blood of demon worshipping skullcap wearers. So like, that's what I think he's referring to. But that's not subtle. That's not like a lack of subtlety. That's not a sane way of talking. And if you want to say it is sane, I think he might have a few issues. And again, I'm not saying that saying this makes him insane. I'm not saying he's insane. I think he knows a lot of what he's doing, and I think that actually makes it more of a problem. But so go blank, great university. I was at undergrad at UA. I think that's University of Arizona. I'm not sure. Yes, I agree. Zoom or something like it would be better than email. I teach weekends as well as weekdays. I'm going to burn out soon, but I'm running a dojo that's open every day. So his dojo, that was where he was teaching Greek before he stopped doing that, when he just switched it to only be Lady Babylon. But so we were being swarmed by Gnostic theosophists with violent racist objectives. Fantastic. Again, thinking, I'm not going to say thinking that, but saying that it's fantastic, abjectly weird. And it's one of those things where I think if someone tells you the same thing enough, at a certain time, maybe you should start believing them. Like, if you constantly talk to someone like this, maybe it's actually indicative of something. Maybe you're not just an edgelord, but I'm not going to say that, he actually thinks it's fantastic. I'm just going to infer that there's something really weird about this. So, fantastic, right up my alley. I've seen these guys at more than one Aryan dance. What does that mean? Like, I just want to pause on that. What is an Aryan dance? And what does it mean that he's seen them at more than one?
Is he saying that he's just
that's the thing. I'm not
familiar
actually
with
sure
this and
what
seen this
this
a lot in
means.
the world?
I don't know if he's referencing some sort of like Aryan festival or whatever, but like this is just abjectly weird things for someone who doesn't have. And again, I'm not saying he's a Nazi. I'm not saying he's a fascist. I'm not saying that he's any of these things because I don't know what he is. That's part of the enigma of Ammon. But who besides someone who had those type of leanings would say something like this? Again, some people are just really weird and they have no filter. But even then, like, a filter is what stops you from saying what you're thinking. Why would someone be thinking this, is my point. Anyway, to continue, I think you were dead right on going back to the Egyptian and Greek sources to come up with an inoculum. As a matter of finesse, I'd recommend you set your time machine to Hellenism that sprang out of Alexandria. If you were a necromancer, I'd send you to a cemetery in Egypt full of deceased orphics. Maybe a visit to Ammon and the god Nostos. So here he's referencing Ammon again, and it's one of those things that it does kind of make me like it makes me question what he believes about himself or like why he took on that name, because from what I said before, I don't think that was his given name. I think he added it himself. Which again, I'm not saying that it doesn't make it not his name. You can change your name, but it's a bit weird. He's their future. I also don't know if, because again, this is a bit out of my wheelhouse. I don't know what Nostos is. I don't know if he's trying to do like a cheeky pun about like Ammon and Gnostic informant, but this was before he started to have issues with Neil, but it's not my story to tell. Anyway, he's their future. If you bring their god from the void, you may gain some insight into their future. Personally, if I were a culturally religious pharmaceutical company, I'd be looking for a vaccine that used prophecy as an adjutant. Now notice this. If he was a culturally religious pharmaceutical company, he looked for a vaccine that used prophecy as an adjutant. Now, according to what he says, in his own words, prophecy is something that only comes from, from muses or from people who are, like, trained in a certain way. And one thing that's, like, again, it's been a long time since I listened to this, I might be rusty, but the emphasis on somewhat of a young girl who's going through that, that period of change. And, like, there's a weird obsession that Ammon has with that. And again, you could say, oh, well, he's just looking at the text, but it's like, there's a way that you can talk about a text in a clinical manner, or even in a passionate manner, but the way that he talks about it, it borders on a obsession in my mind. And again, this might just be my own perspective, but I thought that was worth sharing. So I follow the predictions of their desired ends back to the source of infection. So next one. All right. Gematria. I was in Safed once, while living in Jezebel's vineyard in Jezreel. It stank of the wedding of numerology and fascism. So what he's referencing there is he's referencing Safed or Tzfat, which is like it's the most mystical city in Israel. It's where a lot of Kabbalists live. I don't really know I don't really know specifically what he's referencing there. That's also the place where he claims he saw people who were possessed and told him he was leading a troop of demons that were going to usher in that Antichrist or something. I forget exactly what he said, but like this is stuff out of his own mouth. Like, I know it sounds crazy. It sounds like I'm making this up, but some of the most insane stuff has come out of his own mouth, not mine. I'm just repeating it. Very unfriendly. My Israeli co-excavators were seriously critical. Something about the way they treated women and the fact that they didn't have military service was what they disliked. If I were you, I'd check the connections to the sacred arithmetic of Pythagoras. You could write your prophecy yourself. It's just numbers. So the theosophical Gnostic fascists are dredging up Overton's unthinkable window and pushing it toward policy. Those rascals. They're going to get their horror show off the ground before anyone except you notices. Now, that stuck out to me because it's one of those things where I feel like in hindsight, I should have noticed this happening, but I didn't. And in this case, I only noticed it really, well, not because of looking at this, but seeing this, it kind of just confirmed what I already feared. But if history remains predictably consistent, the window will expand both right and left, and the dudes left in the middle will be the targets. Now, what's interesting with that is, since this all has happened, despite the fact that Ammon is actually very, very, very left-wing, he's actually started to pull in some people from the far right. Now, I'm not going to say I know, what percentage of it is, but it's the type of thing where it seems like he's kind of, also, I mean, he doesn't moderate his own channel, that's Chewy, but it seems as if he's willing to allow people that he disagrees on fundamentally in order to get his ideas across. It's the type of thing where and I also think this is something you're probably going to see, especially given the current zeitgeist and the fact that Trump's now the incumbent. I suspect that, because even though Trump was already a big part of Ammon's narrative, it was more so as an oppositionary figure. And now that Trump is in office, or Trump will be in office, I do kind of wonder whether he's going to reorient it to turn Trump into some sort of gatekeeper, who brings amongst the apocalypse, but isn't the villain who needs to be defeated. Or honestly, I don't know. Again, this is just speculating on stuff that I think is maybe not as relevant, but to continue, let's see, where is it? If history remains predictably consistent, the window will expand both right and left, and the dudes left in the middle will be the targets. Brilliant Aryan apocalypse, if you ask me. Again, who says that? The evangelicals will get their cake and eat it too. Wow. Okay, so this is another thing that, I just want to point this out. I'm a male. I'm a man. And he said this to me. And I know for a fact, I've heard it from other people, from women, that they've experienced things like, except in my case, I just shrugged it off. But it's the type of thing where, there really is a layer of sexual harassment to this, potentially. You don't, in common, but you don't say this shit. Wow, your reference to the bigendered God is really turning me on. Some guy with my name wrote a book titled Hermaphrodites, Gynemorphs, and Jesus. That I really think is, a line you don't cross with people, especially that you just met. But beyond that, he's he's acted this way with women as well, is my point. This isn't just like him being a bro or whatever. It has the image you need to see where all this pattern is going. Your anti-cult fascism vaccine. Now, notice this. This is all the way back in August of 2022. Your anti-cult fascism vaccine better include Jesus and his naked boy, or it won't generate a sufficient immune response, and we will all end up getting sick. I've seen where that one goes. Bacchus is back, and someone is about to show how deviant the Jews really are. I hear you guys work demons to suck the life out of babies. Believe it or not, that's a 2,000-year-old accusation, and it's about to make a comeback. Oh man, this apocalypse is going to be painful. Esoteric fascism indeed, well stated. We should zoom. Gotta run to teach Homer. Best, Ammon. So, like, at a certain point, I do kind of feel like I had just been, like a frog that was slowly boiled. Like, this was being slowly normalized. And it was only after frankly, I don't even know how long or if I would have noticed this if it had. And this is the thing that scares me. And the reason why I really insist that most people involved with Ammon aren't bad. They don't realize what he's really intending, or at least what he's insinuating. And the fact is, no one wants to believe that someone's actually implying this stuff, but if someone consistently tells you the same thing, and this is before, honestly, I get a bit flustered talking about this because the whole thing is insane, to be completely honest, and it's only really looking back on this that you're able to see that. And the fact is that, that's what I was saying, that if I was able to miss this, I was able to miss this so easily just because I wasn't being critical, because I didn't think I needed to be. And I think maybe that's the lesson to be learned, is that you should always be critical. There's nothing wrong with being critical. It's more so, are you being, constructively critical, or are you just trying to tear people down? And I think it always just needs to be about strengthening people's arguments. And when you find flaws in people's arguments, they shouldn't be shutting you down or ignoring that flaw. They should be trying to address that.
Yeah. So just for clarity, some people might be reading this and be like, well, I'm not exactly sure what's, really making you upset. Maybe they're used to Ammon saying stuff like this. So what specifically in there makes you go,
I mean,
all
so
right,
the thing is,
that's off. That's not something that should be
back
said.
here, this was before he went into his whole, deep, intricate theory about what, the antibodies and the boy and the garden. But basically, on one hand, it's just how flippant and how nonchalant he is talking about sexual abuse. But on the other hand, I really think the thing to focus on here is that he's like, here, Bacchus is back, and someone is about to show how deviant the Jews really are. I hear you guys work demons to suck the life out of babies. Believe it or not, that's a 2,000-year-old accusation, and it's about to make a comeback. It's the type of thing where, obviously, there's ways of describing why this is an issue, but at the same time, it's the type of thing where I'd hope that the issue with most of the stuff that's highlighted, at least in orange, how the issue's pretty obvious, and sometimes it's not as simple as that you can put your finger on it, but that there's something off about it. And I think that's part of why I was able to ignore these red flags for so long, is because it's not anything but then I also have to ask my question, what would have been the, red line for me? If he would, what could have he said about Jews to make me be like, oh, he's actually serious about this? And the thing is that I think that's part of the reason why certain personality types use this type of humor, because it's deniable. It's plausible deniability, but it has the same hurtful impact, the same ability to set someone off edge, and at the same time, it has that same ability to spread harmful ideas. Given this was just between me and him, but at the end of the day, he's insinuated such in many of his live streams.
So maybe if I can be more specific. So He says someone is about to show how deviant the Jews really are. So I guess he's implying what, that the Jews are what, bad people or doing really bad things. And then he says, I hear you guys work demons to suck the life out of babies. So like, whether he's being sarcastic or just being weird, I don't understand how this is even like a joke. But um or unless if he actually thinks he's like actually believes like there are Jews that are trying to suck the life out of babies. Either way, he thinks really negatively of
I
Jews.
think he thinks
Do you think
really
that, or is
negatively
this a
of
total joke to
monists.
you? What do you
Like, so
think?
I don't, but for whatever reason, he never really criticizes Islam that much, which I think is kind of interesting. But he focuses exclusively, for the most part, on, I mean, like, given there's elements of it, but like, he really just focuses on Christianity and on Judaism. But the thing is, with Christianity, there isn't this dark history of Christians being accused of worshiping demons and of sacrificing children. There is that dark history. And, well, actually, and see this interesting thing. Even though some of these accusations did precede that, a lot of the anti-Jewish, like, blood libels actually started off as like connected with Christian Jews before there was a distinction, because of like misperceptions about the host and the communion wine, and basically this idea of cannibalism and drinking blood. And so then later, when the Romans, they're like, oh, look at these Christians, but they didn't say look at these Christians. They saw it as a group of of Jews, because it was Jews at the time. And then was it? So then, when Rome becomes Christian, all of a sudden they can't say, "Oh, look at those Christians drinking baby blood," because they're like, "We're the Christians who would be drinking baby blood." So they have to switch it to the Jews. And by this time, there's been a separation between Judaism and Christianity, and so that distinction makes a difference. And so with that, like, yes, there is a history that, like, at one point Christians were accused of, cannibalism and drinking blood, but it didn't stick with Christianity like it did with Judaism, and that's primarily because of Christianity needing to offload that old stereotype off onto someone. And so with that, like, basically Ammon is on one hand giving credibility to that, and like, on one hand, I thought he was being sarcastic, or he was trying to be funny. But then later on, when he does teach about this stuff, and he implies, oh well, it's not like just the Jews were doing it; they actually copied it from the Greeks or whatever. But he does imply this type of thing. But like, obviously, his issue with this wouldn't be the demons, because he literally talks about summoning demons, himself. He doesn't have an issue with that. So it's more so just this idea of like I don't know whether he has this idea of like trying to convince people that this is what the Jews were actually doing, in order to convince them that this is what the Christians were actually doing, in order to convince. I don't know, because there's only so much you can try to understand about someone who has a very, like, again, I'm not going to try to diagnose anyone, because I'm just not going to, and also I'm not qualified. But all I'm going to say is this is something that comes out of the makings of a warped mind, and I'm not going to try to understand it any more than I already have.
Okay, I think that's worth
Yeah,
keep going
yeah.
on. All right, so
So,
did
so I
you want to say
respond
anything
to
about
him.
your
I'm
response?
going to take the time to properly analyze and respond to your previous email, but I wanted to let you know about two of my university courses. One in particular I wanted to bring up was the professor who teaches the course is aware of and discussed Judaism and its dangerous impacts and its implications, as well as that threat of the natural ebb and flow when people and their traditions are separated. They will call out to an abyss and grasp onto anything, granting them answers. Now, that's also like another thing I want to point out. That, it's something I said, but when people are separated from their, from their traditions, they'll call out to an abyss and grasp onto anything that grants them answers, anything or anyone. So, like that, and I think that you could view that whether that's someone from their like ancestral traditions or even just from the tradition that they were raised in. It kind of this idea that like when you're when you're trying to make sense of the world in a whole new way, you're that much more susceptible. But anyway, the second class is taught by amazingly educated professor on the ancient world, and the class is from is Roman religion. I have to tell you, the class is dense with the, I think that's the aura of Kybele and the, what's that, the Cowlus? I don't know, of Aphrodite. Anyway, what's that, power? Anyway, our final assignment that runs throughout the semester is essentially creating a Roman cult devoted to. So I mean, it's not that significant. I just thought I'd include it because it was part of that same email. So, next. All right. So now here's some of these are auxiliary to the other conversation. He just sent me this. So August 20. Oh, I guess this is in the wrong order. So I'll read the first one first. So August 20th. We should zoom sometime. Was reading this morning about Christian anti-Semite insurrectionists promoting old-style KKK in Alabama, bunch of Trumpists. Bet you Kushner gets whacked for ratting out the boss to the feds. It'll set off a chain reaction of anti-Semitism that will result in increased violence. Again, nothing inherently wrong with saying that, but it's weird. Why are you thinking about someone getting killed and about the fact that they're Jewish and that it's going to cause more violence? I can't fault someone for simply saying it, but it's it does raise a question. All comes back to murdering Jesus, which is the true American story, right? Those lunatics just need the right justification. Fascinating stuff, disturbing and ill-omened, but real. If you've got time next week for a Zoom, email me. And then you emailed me the next day saying, I got my first email from a white nationalist. He was quick to point out the problems of YouTube, quote-unquote YouTube, and the happy rise of Nazis. I see why you're studying these groups. So, nothing too weird in that one, but next one. So here I responded. This was a response to his, the other email that he had sent. Ammon, sorry, this is my response to him. Ammon, yeah? Oh, apologies. I'll just read the one on the right. Ammon, I'm definitely down to talk sometime soon. The best days for me are most likely, I'll just read the important stuff. Skipping to, okay. Basically, what I've come to realize is that regardless of whether Jews actually are worshiping a form of Saturn or not, through the synchronization of Yahweh as he appears in sum total, anti-Semites will make that claim because they wish to slander Jews as baby eaters and demonic via the Satan/Saturn similarity in sounds. Oh, that's funny, kind of got consonants put out there. Ultimately, we need to renormalize paganism before white nationalists and esoteric fascists get their claws into it. And we need to renormalize Saturn and Bacchus and Kybele, otherwise radical Christianity will win. It's only in diversity that religion can truly thrive. Look forward to brainstorming. So also I want to specify, my issue isn't Christianity, I'm talking about radical Christianity, the type of people who, are Deus Vult, they want to make Christianity the worldwide religion and everybody else has. So just want to specify that. But so that was my response. I think that kind of sums up how, my response. I'm not anti really anything that he was teaching besides the really problematic stuff. I don't have an issue with paganism. I don't have an issue with Satanism. My issue is with specific, well, we'll get to it in a moment, but next. All right. So now here's him asking me my thoughts. Well, I'll just read it. I'm curious about your opinion on Gnostic Informant's interview with Jason Reza Giorgiani. He's a Nazi, straight up, and he's close with Prometheus, but his Greek is amateur and he's off by 180 degrees. Amen. So then this is me to him. Just started watching the interview and looked him up. He has some really odd connections to various ideologues, like you said, but what particularly stood out to me was this. He's predicted that something about the first and greatest white genocide. He's predicted that Muslim citizens and immigrants will be deported from Europe by 2050 and stated that such deportations would follow from continued ill-advised policies regarding mass migration in Europe. According to Harrison Fluss and Landon Frim, writing in Jacobin, Giorgiani has attracted negative attention due to his promotion of various British theories popular amongst white nationalists and conspiracy theorists. Giorgiani's writings, political activities, speeches, and media appearances have drawn charges of anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. In one instance, he suggested that Yahweh and Allah were actually space aliens who enslaved their believers and tricked them into committing genocide. He has openly characterized certain certain high-ranking Nazi officials as akin to supermen with psychic powers. While Giorgiani has vehemently denied the charges of bigotry leveled against him, his public statements do make you wonder. So then my words again. I'd like to hear more about your thoughts on him because he's new to me. So Ammon responds, my thoughts. A Nazi is a Nazi is a Nazi, which I think is very true. He predicts the return of concentration camps and is an admitted eugenicist. Now, I just want to point out, what is a eugenicist? It's someone who believes that they can, improve the state of humanity or, the human gene through, different techniques, both positive and negative, meaning like the use of things which restrict as certain people from having kids as well as others being like, trying to increase the quote unquote quality of other people's kids. It's messed up. There's a reason why we don't do it. And like some people could argue, well, there's a form that's benign, but the thing is that like it's going to go back. The point is, the reason I'm bringing this up is because Ammon's whole theory of what the Medusae were, like the Wanasei, the temple virgins, his whole thing, it is basically eugenicist. He teaches that they were like of the superior breed because of how they were raised on certain substances and, not eating certain things, eating other things. It's not on a strictly racial bias like most people are used to today, but it does go uncomfortably close to some elements of eugenicism, specifically this idea of like a superman or a superwoman or essentially a superhuman, and that could be created through a combination of different techniques. So he does some of the things he's critiquing people on, he's guilty of himself, given I don't think to the same extent, but it is worth noting. He likes to deny white nationalism, but his Aryan bent towards the establishment of the mystery is straight up Hitler. The Aryan bend towards the establishment of the mystery, that sounds really similar to stuff that Ammon has said. But again, it's the type of thing where it's not solid enough to be certain. And he predicts a return to good old-fashioned fascism. So there you go. But again, Ammon has too. He talks about that fascism is coming back. Like, it's the type of thing where he's saying one thing, but then he's saying this thing about this person, but he's literally doing the same thing. And you could say, well, he doesn't say that fascism is good, but he doesn't say that Giorgiani says fascism is good, even though I think he probably does think so. Anyway, his Promethean focus is most telling. Superman, anyone? Now, notice this. Promethean focus is most telling. Now, we'll continue. He pretends to know Greek, but his classical philology is stunted at best. Good enough to appear authoritative, but like most Nazis, he misses the boat on the actual philology. Ammon's Semitic philology is stunted at best. Good enough to appear authoritative, not even really, but like most blanks, he misses the boat on the actual philology. But just to draw another parallel. So then he said, this is like another one of those, like, okay, maybe it's a joke, but again, it's just super weird to say. I propose Neil creates a show called Gnostic Nazi, in which he looks at Mein Kampf and the Hail Trump stuff, the fucks with Spencer and the rest of Reza's associates are into. Reza would be the guest. And I joined for the last 30 minutes to introduce everyone to Promethea, the Aryan queen of the right the Nazis of the 30s were attempting to reestablish as Aryan followers of the Black Wolf, the Dark Star stuff, prime Aryan mysticism. So like I don't know if he's like, if this is all just like a wink and a nod, like, oh, he's just trying to poke fun at Giorgiani. But then he goes on, I spoke at a Nazi monastery once about Aryans and Etruscan cults. They follow Pope Pius, and their bishops aren't recognized by the Vatican. They're into mysticism for a reason. It was a great audience. He thinks that a Nazi monastery was a great audience, and he got a nice coffee table book out of it. Very polite. And their Nazi eyes just lit up, I'll read it exactly how he says it. Their Nazi eyes light up when you give them the goodies and the runes. Reza talks the talk and walks the walk, but he could be hitting the final solution out of the park if he had his group together. He's reaching for it, though. Notice this. He's saying that Reza could hit his final solution out of the park if he had his Greek together. Like, he's not, it's like, it's close enough to where he's saying, like, oh, it's like, if only he had it together, like, almost like he could help, but at the same time, he's not saying that. I think it would be a stretch to say that, but it's the type of thing where it's like, why would you say that? Like, it just feels weird talking about, like, oh, he could do this if only. He'd be able to kill all these people if only. It's not normal to say that. But, again, it could be that I've been looking at these emails for a while, and so maybe I'm seeing more than is there. But, next. Alright. So I responded, have you talked to Neil about this? And, yeah, this is the same email. It's just so you can see the full thing. So, have you talked to Neil about this? It's definitely concerning to give him a platform, and I personally had never heard of this guy prior to this. Also, do you have a way that we can communicate back and forth, perhaps, a bit more casually than email? Because it's really easy for me to miss emails in a way that I don't miss direct messages and text. We should set up a Zoom meeting sometime because it's much easier for me to talk with audio-visual. So then he said, sure, I teach most of the day, but I Zoom when I've got free time during the week. We should Zoom sometime this week. I'll give Neil a hard time. I really don't think he knows what sort of degenerate this guy is. To which I draw the parallel. I don't think anybody realized what type of degenerate Ammon was at the time. And it'll all become more clear. And given all the stuff that I'm going to talk about, he's made very apparent and has talked about it in the months and years since throughout his YouTube channel. It's like you literally don't have to believe the stuff I'm going to say after, but because he said it himself, but it's also in the text. So next, and things will start to really get clear, like how I'm connecting this all together. So this was my text with him after. Also, for context, because I don't want anyone to try to think that this is like, oh, I have an issue with Almond, so I put a snake emoji by it. No, it's because snakes are, like the symbol of alchemy, and there's no negative symbolism to the snake in that. I don't view snakes as bad animals, so I just wanted to clear that up. But yeah, especially the connection with the venom. So, hey Almon, Neil gave me your number. I ended up remembering that there was this one line in the Talmud that was being used by anti-Semites to try and make Judaism look like a sex cult. And I forget exactly what. This was a reference to like if you're at the altar and you're raising up the teruma, which is like it's a type of offering or whatever, and you feel yourself about to release seed, you're supposed to you're supposed to grab your member so that like you don't. Basically, like this idea that if you grab it, you can stop it. It was like weird, but basically talking about how like I don't even remember what it was, but it was something that I probably didn't understand the context. So I shared it with him. He said, literally, grab your penis to stop the emission. Fantastic. What's making them so horny? So then I said, I have a feeling it was something to do with the drug-induced ecstasy. So then he said, if the priests feel a shiver, dudes may have been into the aphrodisiacs. So then I respond, this is so wild. The idea that there's a parallel between aiming your stream and the flood Yahweh sent on the world. I wonder if there is a similar imagery looking at creation as a seminal emission from God, similar to rain being urine. Basically, this idea, Mizu says, like, I misinterpreted it again. I thought I was saying that if you, something like if you hold your member in order to aim the pea, then that's why God brought on the flood. I thought it was saying something about God aiming, like, and causing rain, but actually it was saying, no, that the reason why the flood was brought on was because of, Odinism, if you know what that is, for those who know. So then he responds, implies God's waters are semen. That's pretty standard. Zeus the thunder sends his rain to the fertile earth. Good stuff. There's a classical link. I wonder if the flood itself is presented anywhere as semen. Wow, that's pretty specific. Amazing. So it's clear he says amazing a lot when he's impressed by something, which, like amazing or fantastic, which, so I don't know if he's like impressed by what I was showing him about these groups or whether, so like there's so many reasons he could say amazing. I just want to clarify that. I'm not saying that for sure he has these thoughts about us because nobody knows what someone else thinks. We can only know what we say. Right, next. Right. The flood is explained as almost a mirroring of men's actions through Yahweh. Essentially, he's like, oh, you guys think you're going to J off and all is well? I'm going to J off and it's not going to be fun for any of you because you're going to be drowning in mine. That was my commentary. Holy crap, this is so wild. It almost seems like the fear over similarity by mistaking genital deformation or self-mutilation is maybe due to the Kybalic and Astartide practices that venerated castration. You're going to love this next part I found. That's a clear reference to Asherah worship. Holy crap, this is saying that the child sacrifice in the Bible is semen emission, not omission, emission. Because they believe that children were pre-existent in semen and just needed a womb to grow in. Any emission or sacrificial use of semen or the seed of the woman is viewed as murderous. I just blew my own mind by reading about God blowing his load. So then he responds, child sacrifice and semen emission are conjoined by drugs on the Greek side. We drink the drugged seed, Saturnian mystery. So you could say he's not actually like into this ritual, but like he's talking about, we do it. And I mean, again, I don't think there's anything inherently wrong as long as everybody's consenting and everything, but like the stuff that he implies, it gets concerning. So I respond, I'm not so sure that telling conservative Christians that the child sacrificing, Israelites were actually just semen suckers will do anything to combat anti-Semitism, but maybe if it can be shown that these practices were universal. They said agreed, but it's all worth it if it allows us to elucidate the history. So this is where things get really sinister, I think. I said, is there any pharmacological basis for using such fluids, or does it have to do with the fusion of sexual energy and its produce with the active ingredients in the said concoction? Like, the only mechanism I can really try and land on is the potential presence of endorphins and hormones within the emissions, but it seems like at the most base level, it is being used as a base for the active ingredients. So then he says, there's an antidote for viper venom that comes from boy ejaculate and pre-pubertal breasts. I asked a professor of venoms why. Probably antibodies. So I just skipped over this because it's the type of thing you have to ignore it in order to not think like, who the heck am I talking to? So I said, the thing that sucks about proving this stuff is that it's impossible to ethically reconstruct it. So it's all theoretical, not for long. Clinical applications are a possible avenue. So then I said, how do you figure? The only way I can see it being proven is in animal models. So he responds, if you want the Aryan mystery, you need the Aryan priestess's body for production of the communion. He's the one who's talking about the Aryan mystery. He's not joking now. This is what he's talking about. This is his shtick. And I don't know how I didn't see it more clearly. So he's saying, if you want the mystery, you need the priestess's body for the production of the communion. And then he goes on to say, I suspect the anti-cancer properties will be the way to rediscover the power of the snake on the pole. He's telling people that there's a possibility to cure cancer with this mystery. This is what I was talking about before. If someone's desperate enough, if they believe enough, would they be willing to do something horrible enough in order to save their own life? And again, it's the type of thing, it's such an absurd situation, but this whole thing is. And he's been talking about this stuff out loud for a long time. And there's people who are, running defense are saying, oh, well, he's not serious about this, or, oh, he's not everybody would be consenting. But the thing is, he literally lays it out that according to his understanding of the mystery, it requires someone who, within our understanding of society, cannot consent. But so his whole shtick is that it requires someone who is pre-pubertal. That once they hit puberty, if they haven't gone through this transition already, their body won't be able to produce it. And so it's all about training someone up from a young age and making sure that their body's able to produce it. But the thing is that there's two levels of this. There's the, issue of medical consent, which children wouldn't be able to give, and something like this, there wouldn't be a medical reason for it. Like, but on top of that, there's the side to this that, like, the mystery is sexual. You can't separate the medical from the sexual, is his whole claim. Sorry, which is simply because, like, sexuality in the Greek world was very different than now, and there's a lot of overlap. But basically, there's in our society, in order to bring about this communion, this mystery communion, he would have to break laws. There would have to be, someone who is basically from before they were even really aware, they would be having to be raised up in this tradition, and then their body would be used basically as a factory for drugs. And the thing is that, like, there's cases of people doing really wild things, and whether it's because they were delusional or because they were on drugs, like, there's different reasons that people do things. But the point is that, like, people might think this is just so far afield and this would never happen, but it could. And that's why even one person suggesting this publicly and having a platform and saying that there's this anti-cancer cure and you'll be able to be, spiritually in tune with the gods, like, it's basically, it's like what the QAnon people believe about adrenochrome. He's basically trying to sell to people the idea of as a good thing, like, hey, we just like his issue isn't with children being used in the process. His issue is with money being made off of it, because he believes that it's so sacred that money profanes it. Not anything to do with the abuse of children. All right, next one. All right, so this is where it gets so clear. I said, I guess if you could find the mechanism, you could try and synthesize it ex vivo, or basically outside of a living body, so that it doesn't require the use of those unable to consent. But I also fear that if this was proven to work, that certain cartels and international crime rings would try and produce it using the people they already traffic. So then he said, where is the fun in that? Where's the fun in trying to synthesize it outside of the body? Where's the fun in trying to use someone, or where's the fun in not using someone that can't consent? Like, that's dark. And you could say this is a joke, but I think this is one of the darkest jokes that, if these are jokes, he would have made. Like, whether this is serious or a joke, this is really disturbing. To say, where's the fun in doing something that doesn't require the harming of human beings? I mean, I don't know if it's just me, but like that just really, when I saw it this time, it had a whole different significance to me than when I initially saw it. I'd probably just read over it initially when we were texting, and then I looked back over it and I'm like, wow. So then I respond to him because, I mean, I don't know how to respond to that. I say, do you think this is the seed of truth at the center of the BS-ery that is QAnon? He said, BS-ery, that's a fantastic creation. Love it almost as much as effery. Slightly different connotation. So I said, creating such a horrific perception of what the elites do to stay healthy, while simultaneously trying to move the Overton window to make child marriage acceptable under the premise that at least the children aren't being killed, essentially creating such a horrific perception, essentially normalizing for themselves what they demonize for others. And notice this, the same way that QAnon demonizes child sex abuse by elites, but they normalize child marriage, like insofar as like, oh well, someone should be able to marry a child if their parents, give consent, and like because that actually is a stream of thought in parts of the far right. Basically, that same way that it's okay in this situation but not in this, even though in one case it's not real, in the other case it is. in that same way, Ammon is basically trying to imply that, children are being abused by the Catholics. That's not okay. It's got to stop. But, we need to bring about the mystery communion, and it might require the use of some children, but you know what? It's for the mystery, so it's okay. And it's not a corrupted mystery. That's the parallel that I'm drawing there. So then he says, QAnon is real. Ask any hillbilly from Tennessee with a church. Now that clearly is a joke, because he doesn't actually think that it's real just because just any hillbilly from Tennessee with a church believes it. But so I laugh. I say LOL. Then he said, Neil should do a show about QAnon and Mein Kampf. Then I respond, the more I've learned, the more I'm convinced that QAnon was an attempt to copy Christian messages about fighting the powers that be, powers in high places, save the children, Herod's slaughter of the innocents, where we go when we go all comes from God and will return to God. So drawing parallels between that. Next. Let's see. There's honestly not a whole lot separating QAnon beliefs from older Christian ones. They've just been updated for modernity and injected into the newest sphere that is the internet. So then he said, Amen. Bunch of baby Jewish Satanists who are causing all the problems, medieval shit bra. Now there, again, I think he's probably joking, but so then I said, and 17 is the number that the Q-nuts are obsessed with. I forgot why I said that, but so he said, so why do they gravitate to Nazism? QAnon. Is it just that nationalism feels so good? Again, a weird thing to say, but why not say, is it just that they're brainwashed? But why would you say that nationalism feels, again, I think this is maybe a bit more nitpicky than not, but I said, it's because people are co-opting the messaging of anti-corruption and anti-child abuse to be fundamentally anti-democracy and anti-Jewish. So then he responded, my German instructor in high school lived through World War II. She said the rallies were awe-inspiring. I guess everyone likes to band together to save the children from democracy and Jews. It's too bad it fits the evangelical apocalyptic plan so perfectly. And then I just started saying something else, but it wasn't really that significant. So I think is at the end. So yeah, I mean, it's a lot to take in, and it's not like any of these things in and of themselves are that damning, but in conjunction with everything he's done in the past 2 years and all the claims being made that, oh, he doesn't believe this, or oh, he's not doing this, and you can see that it's demonstrated here. I don't know you could, outright say that you see here he plans to start a cult, but you can see that he's talking about knowing how to manipulate people, how to twist perception, how to harness belief and faith on the basis of initiation, literally using initiation. And you could say, oh, well, his satanic initiations aren't real satanic initiations, but are you going to say they're not real initiations? And if you are, then you're going against what Ammon's saying. So it's the type of thing where, again, I don't think that he's the devil. I think he's just a man, but I think that he has been given a platform by a lot of people who maybe shouldn't have, and as a result, he's grown a significant following. And I think what is possibly more concerning than anything is that as, there's about to be a switch in the political atmosphere in the U.S., Ammon is potentially a risk of inflating the perceptions of groups like QAnon or even less radical groups, because, the truth is that Ammon is essentially espousing an adrenochrome type belief system that, and the thing is that you already have a scary percentage of the population that believes that thing exists. And now Ammon is potentially legitimizing their fears while also knowing what he's doing is going to impact many marginalized and vulnerable communities that he's not even a part of. And to him, it almost seems like it's all a joke at best, and at worst, it sounds like he actually is getting off on this, or he's interested in this, he's enjoying it. And again, I don't know what's worse. If you think this is all just funny, haha, laughing at it, has no effect on me, or whether you're doing this deliberately. I think they're both really evil, truthfully.
Mm. Yeah, careless at best. So, um, yeah. So if you could just summarize in just a couple of minutes, what you wanted people to get out of this. I know you've kind of repeated a few times, but
I
just
think
make the point
probably the
clear.
biggest takeaway
Could
is
you do
that,
that real quick here?
well, I mean, even just using his own words, Ammon is not a Semitic scholar. That is not his wheelhouse, and as he used to say, he doesn't talk smack in areas he doesn't know anything about. But he does. Right, well, he does talk smack in areas that he doesn't know anything about. And that doesn't mean that he doesn't know anything about Greek. It doesn't mean that he doesn't know anything about classics. It doesn't mean he doesn't know anything about, medicine or magic or, mysticism in the ancient world. I think he knows a lot about all those things. I think that's part of why he's able to draw so many people in. I know that's why he drew me in. And frankly, I don't think that I would have, left of my own volition. I think that the only reason I started to, be able to see things from this new perspective was because that other perspective was forced because I was no longer on the inside. And, some people, they might say I'm bitter, but I'm really not. If I was bitter at any point, it wasn't why I got kicked out. Like, but in hindsight, I think that it's important that I did, because otherwise I don't know that I would have seen this perspective. And but more importantly, I think that it really needs to be stated. Ammon is a brilliant scholar, but brilliance isn't, brilliance in and of itself needs to be tempered with humility, with honesty, with modesty, with a drive to learn, not just with to try and prove what one already thinks. And with that, I don't think that people should harass Ammon. I don't think that people should harass his followers. That people should just realize that Ammon does have an agenda, and he's not being completely honest about it. And honestly, maybe he is, and maybe it's simply the people who are following him who want to make excuses in order to justify their ability to continue to listen to him without being disgusted. Like, oh, this is just a joke, or he's just trying to, he's just trying to rile the Christians up. He's using it as a buffer to keep people who aren't ready to hear the message away. Like, there's all these different things that they could say to themselves about it. But I think more than anything, like, if someone tells you who they are, especially if they tell you over and over and over and over again, that's probably who they are. And it's not all of who they are, but if you're continuously trying to find ways to dismiss the literal definition, the literal meaning of what he is saying, then there might be an issue with what he's saying, because if you can't accept what he's saying word for word, straight up, and that he means that literally, then why are you listening to him? Or I'm going to phrase that bad, but the point is that, I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with listening to him. I just think it's important that people realize where he's coming from, and that he does know how to manipulate people, how to work cult like mechanisms, and to basically to change people's perceptions, or rather to work on their perceptions and to feed their perceptions to suit whatever narrative he needs.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you so much for explaining that. So for made it real simple, so I heard that he feels he is confident enough to basically convince cult members, essentially, or uh, you know, people that believe wild things, to do whatever he thinks that they can do. He has admitted to, I guess, essentially being okay with uh some type of pederasty, um, and a lot of other really
Yeah,
wild things that we
I
talked about
mean,
today.
honestly, I don't remember a whole lot because the whole time period was kind of, it was really rough and rocky. But what I do remember is that I still had some friends in the group, and they let me know that like there was a lot of people who were mocking me and who were criticizing me for getting kicked out and for like even though the reason I got kicked out was because I wouldn't. So this was when they were transitioning from more of like a study group type thing into they also started like a bit of an order, like what someone would officially call like a cult, as opposed to just people doing cult like stuff. But again, I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with cults. That's part of why like I was willing to be kind of a part of it. But the thing is that it wasn't about learning. It was about, or I mean, it wasn't only about learning. It was specifically like Ammon was basically taking over as a sycophant, or not sycophant, but a psychopomp, as like a ritual leader of the group or whatever, even if it was unofficially. And he was telling people to do these initiations that a lot of people didn't feel comfortable doing, and including stuff like he managed to, I wouldn't say like blackmail, because it wasn't blackmail, but like he pressured people, two people into appearing on his stream for a satanic a satanic fight night, where both of them were dressed up in drag, which again, nothing wrong with that, but it was a pressure that was being put on people in order to be part of this inner circle. And that's something that I wasn't going to do, and I know a lot of other people weren't as well, including Neil wasn't willing to do that, but Alma gave him a hard time about that. And basically anyone who kind of went back against what Ammon wanted, there was a group of people who, even though I don't think it was directed, they'd hear that something happened, and so they'd kind of go and they'd message someone, or they'd be like, I don't know if it was quite harassment, but it was, they wouldn't leave people alone, whether it was to someone's face or behind their back. Like, even after someone left, there was discussion about them, mocking of them in private chats. And at the end of the day, I'm glad that I was able to see that it was a toxic environment. And even though I didn't choose to leave of my own volition, I'm glad that I did.
Yeah. Thank you so much for opening up. I'm sure
So much.
difficult to talk about this, considering all you've gone through. Yeah, and of course, if you are listening, and if you have experienced some of the things that Enoch's been through, and if you have noticed some of the types of things, please share your thoughts. But I do want to thank you for coming on here and giving more information into the stuff that Am is doing. But thank you so much, and to my fans and followers, make sure you like and subscribe, and follow for more on Ammon. Check out our playlist that'll be in the description. But otherwise, I hope you guys have a good one.